Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Ryan Sears and I'm a sophomore in the college studying government, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the Park Street side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones, and you can join the conversation online with the hashtag JFK Jr. Forum Live and interact with our student-run Instagram at JFK Jr. Forum for behind-the-scenes highlights. So please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guest and our co-moderators, Institute of Politics Director Mark Gearan and the Institute of Politics Student Vice President Maya Jenkins. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Ryan, for bringing us together. Thank you all so much for joining us for what will be a really interesting conversation about public service. We've had some good amount of focus on this in recent weeks here at the JFK Junior Forum. Last week we had the director of the Peace Corps and the head of CNCS, which runs AmeriCorps and Service Stream. So good focus on important issues. So we warmly welcome all of you here. We're also very grateful to have members of the Senior Advisory Committee here at the Institute of Politics that are joining us in Cambridge this week for meetings tomorrow. Our honorary chair, Ambassador Caroline Kennedy, and our chair, Ken Duberstein, are here, and members of the committee. We thank you so much for your leadership and all the time that you give to the Institute of Politics. Mayor Diaz and Congressman Sharp, Congresswoman Molinari are here, and others are coming in over the course of the next 2 days. So they provide really helpful counsel and perspective to the Institute of Politics, and we're very grateful for all that they bring to the committee and to the work of the Institute of Politics. But we want to get to the topic. Tonight's topic is an important one, and Maya Jenkins and I have been given the happy task to co-moderate this, which I'm thrilled to do. But the topic at hand is an important one here at Harvard, and to bring together alums and a student engaged in their reflections on public service, in their lives, and in their careers. And it's with some pride, I think, that we convene at Harvard, because Harvard has a proud history of preparing its graduates to go on to lead lives of consequence in public service and for public purpose, leaders in their communities. Other than the two oldest military academies in the United States, no other institution has given more lives in service than Harvard College. And as a cohort, in terms of students and alums, no other institution has had more medals of honor than graduates and students of Harvard College. So we have a proud history. A proud history here at the Kennedy School, named for President Kennedy, who's certainly inspired generations of Americans to serve their country and to ask what they can do to serve their country. And certainly appropriate here at the Institute of Politics, with a mission to inspire Harvard students, principally undergraduates, to think about careers and lives in public service, and certainly to be forces for good in their communities during the arc of their careers and their lives. So for all these reasons, our discussion and your questions really could not be more important or more timely. It comes also at an interesting time because President Bacow has made a great priority of public service. From his inauguration address, stressing that importance, we see it certainly in the work across the campus. More internships, more students interested, certainly at the Institute of Politics, Phillips Brooks House, the first day of service with virtually every first-year student going out into communities here in Cambridge and across the Boston area in service. A new center for public service and engaged scholarship at the college. The Harvard Votes Challenge, which has made significant progress in terms of not only registering incoming first-year students to vote and to understand the process, but then our midterm results. So we come to this conversation at an interesting time, certainly in American civic life, but also here at Harvard for all the reasons in the moments that I've outlined. So we have a great panel that Maya will formally introduce, but having two elected officials, one at the state level and one at the federal level, a national leader in terms of civic citizenship and a national leader in the service movement, and a current student who is elected to go through her journey here at Harvard as an ROTC cadet. So looking at all these different parts of service in our conversation and then afterwards in questions. So the good news is we have a co-moderator in Maya Jenkins. She is a face well known to those of us at the Institute of Politics. She is a junior majoring, concentrating in sociology. She was a director's intern this summer in Washington at the Public Defender's Office. And she is a very proud resident of Winthrop House.
I am.
I buried the lead.
I know, you did.
So Maya, thank you so much for all you've done for the IOP. And I turn it over to you to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. I want to begin actually by also acknowledging all of the incredible student leaders here at the IOP who are in the audience. I'm grateful to you all, and I specifically want to call out our fearless leader, Anna Duffy, who is the president of the Institute of Politics, Grace Bannister, who is the communications director here at the Institute of Politics, and Olivia Ferdinand, who is our faithful treasurer. Thank you all for everything that you do for all of us, but also for me as a person. I really appreciate you all. We are here tonight to discuss Harvard's call for public service. On the stage tonight, I am lucky enough to be joined by an incredible cohort of individuals who share the passion and belief in the greater calling of public service. And all of us share the experience of Harvard College, which is incredibly exciting. I am joined by Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who is a 2006 graduate of the college and former student leader here at the IOP. I think you were the vice president, so I've got big shoes to fill, but I'm trying my best.
You're going to do just fine.
Thank you. And she now proudly represents New York's 21st Congressional District. She is the youngest Republican woman to ever be elected to Congress. We're joined by Michael Brown, the co-founder of City Year, which he founded with his then roommates at Harvard Law School in 1988. Lots of beautiful things growing here on this campus today, I hope, as well. State Senator Eric Lesser, who proudly represents his home community from Western Massachusetts in the State House. Eric's career in public service has spanned from the college to the campaign trail and eventually to the White House. And Kate Krolicki, who is a leader here at the IOP and a cadet in Harvard's ROTC program. We are very, very excited to have all of you, and I look forward to being able to learn from you over the course of this panel. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Stefanik, State Senator Lesser, Michael Brown, and Kate Krolicki.
All right, thank you. Well done. Thank you, Maya. So Congresswoman Stefanik, let me begin with you if I could.
Sure.
Welcome back.
Happy to be
This
back.
is a terrain you know pretty well.
Yes, this is a very familiar place for me with lots of familiar faces.
Right. Well, we're delighted to have you back. As Maya said, you were the vice president of the IOP, but you're also Winthrop House, I have to say.
I am Team Winthrop House, yes.
Thank you very much. But so it was not too long ago that you were here as a student. You were the first in your immediate family to go to college. You went back home. You were the youngest elected member of Congress and served with distinction, certainly for representing your state, your district. Talk to us about your journey in public service. When you were here as a student, was this something you were actively thinking about, imagining, preparing for? How did it come, and when was the immediate moment when you knew, okay, I'm going to put my name on the ballot, I'm going to run for office?
For me, the IOP was one of the most important parts of my decision-making process to go into public service. My family is not a political family. They are very civic-minded. They're engaged in their community. My parents started a small business. And in high school, I was involved in student council, community service. But it was actually my freshman fall that I was able to be a liaison for Ted Sorensen, who was a fellow at that time. And what an extraordinary experience for someone who, was able to come to Harvard and learn firsthand for someone who truly lived history. That was very formative for me, and after that I became hooked on all the programming at the IOP. And I think having discourse with my friends, Eric Lesser was one of them. We were at college at the same time. He was a year below me. I think that helped spark my interest in pursuing public service. I had the opportunity to intern for Ken Duberstein. He was a board member. So yeah. And that was a wonderful experience to sort of learn from his perspective, having served as President Reagan's chief of staff with his significant experience on Capitol Hill, and also, just the significant role he plays in Washington policymaking as a whole. That was very formative for me. So it was really the IOP's programming that helped spur that initial interest. I would not have predicted I was going to run for office, though, when I was a student. I wanted to work in policy and pursue public service, but I always thought it would be at a staff level. And it was really a couple years after I had graduated and worked in public service and politics that I thought, why not me? I have a voice. We need a new generation of leaders, no matter what political party you're in. So I think having some of the confidence instilled in me, the experiences at the IOP, helped propel me to serve my community. And I love watching my friends like Eric, even though we're in two different parties, choose to run for office and choose to serve their communities. So the IOP was a critical part of that path.
And so you've taken that now to form this PAC, which I find really interesting, of working to help elect more Republican women to office. Could you build that out for us, and why that's a lot of time and effort, and I'm sure travel and significant effort. Tell us how that fits into why that's important in your vision of...
Sure, that actually goes back to the IOP as well. The Women in Leadership program, WIL, that was actually a program that I started my senior year. And I know there are so many young women who have participated in that part of the IOP's programming. I really decided to focus on recruiting Republican women specifically because we are at a historic low. There are only 13 Republican women currently serving in the House, despite the fact that overall we're at historic highs for the number of women in total, which is great news for the country. But I'm a big believer that we need to have diverse candidates and diverse members of Congress in both parties. And I think women bring unique perspectives to policy making, and neither party has a monopoly on women. So I've really tried to encourage Republican women to step up and run for office, and we're very excited that going into 2020 we have more Republican women than ever before filing to run for Congress, and they're putting together very strong campaigns. But it all goes back to the IOP. I was very focused on making sure that women had a seat at the table.
That's awesome.
Michael, I'd love to turn to you. You launched City Year in 1988 with the goal of uniting young adults from a diverse set of backgrounds for a year of full-time public service in schools. And I wonder what the inspiration was for starting City Year, for doing that incredible work.
Appreciate it. It is such a pleasure to be here. My story is such a Harvard story. So it was 40 years ago, basically last month, that I first walked through the gates to my freshman room at Gray's 41. And two things happened on that day. One is I met Alan Casey, one of my roommates, who I ended up basically spending my whole life working to build City Year with. And two, President Bok gathered us all together in the Tercentenary Theater, and his opening words were, "Welcome to Harvard, now please go away." And what he meant by that, this is before people were doing a lot of junior years abroad, he meant take some time and do something different while you're here. You don't have to do 4 years directly. And so what ended up happening is at the end of my sophomore year, I spent a summer as an unpaid intern on Capitol Hill, and it was a very exciting time to be there. And I was like, I felt so alive doing it. And then I thought what President Bok had said about maybe, please go away. So I decided to stick around, and I spent a year, would have been my junior year, and I worked for a congressman named Leon Panetta. So you all know of Leon now. At the time, he represented 200 miles of the most beautiful coastline, San Luis Obispo, Carmel by the Sea, the 17-mile drive. I always teased him, no one wanted to leave there to come to Washington to represent their interest. So they had me from Boston. And Leon, I was 20 years old, and Leon had a bill that would have created a commission to study the idea of voluntary national service, an idea that I had never heard of. And I don't know how many of you ever had the experience where the first time you got exposed to an idea, you just knew it would change your life forever. It would call on Americans when they're young to give a year of service. It would be turn on their justice nerve. It would be a multi-billion-dollar service resource. It could even help complete the American civil rights movement by uniting people from all backgrounds. And if that wasn't enough, just like the GI Bill, it could be a concomitant way for the access to the American dream. If you invest in your country and your country invests in you, you can have access to all kinds of opportunities through a year of service domestically. I was hooked. It was everything that I thought sort of this idealistic soul should work on. And maybe because I didn't feel that necessarily anything was calling me, this is what I wanted to do. And I called up Alan Casey, remember my roommate, back at this point, Courier House. And I told him about this, and he said, as soon as I explained it, he said, you know, that's the one idea that would probably most change the country for the better if it was ever implemented. And that was our first conversation about this idea back in 1982. And I like to say, when people say they want to start something, I say find a passion that you can't be knocked off of, because so many things will try to knock you off of it. And two, find a partner, because the difference between 1 and 2 is not 1, it's infinity, because 2 is a team. And then we gathered other friends from Harvard. My other Harvard roommate ended up starting City of Chicago. Another Harvard friend ended up basically doing our first 1 million hours of service planning. And you know, when President Bacow said at his inauguration that he wants everyone to have the opportunity to do a summer service internship, I thought, it wasn't just the year I did, it was that summer. And summers can be transformative. And so what ended up happening to me is basically I became excited about the idea that one day the most commonly asked question of a young person should be, where will you do your service year? And then we went to law school, and Alan and I went there, and it was an amazing experience, and then they graduated us. And then it was like, well, now what are we going to do? The traditional thing? And we decided to sit down on a Macintosh computer, 128 unenhanced K. You had to load in, there's no hard drive. You had to load in the operating system and a disk. And we banged out what we called a business plan for City Year. I read it recently. It was no business plan. It was political theory. I was a social studies major. And overly long resumes of people that hadn't done much. But the idea was we wanted to get this thing started. And basically it felt like we were running away to join the circus a little bit. But once we committed, so many people and institutions committed. And when I came back to Harvard, the one other thing I wanted to say is I made a beeline for the American Presidency course by Richard Neustadt. And then I went to his office hours and I explained about Leon and my passion. And he became a lifelong mentor. We lost him much too young, and he is one of the greatest influences in my life, and it was right here, and obviously he helped to create all of this, so my roots are really rooted right here in the Kennedy School, and I had so many amazing experiences in this forum, and it's a pleasure to be back.
You're really describing disruption in the educational service space, and you committed yourself to that. And so I have a question about what disruption can and often does look like on our campus in the positive sense. As I'm sure you know, there's an organization called Harvard Forward, which is a student and alumni group working to bring attention to climate change within Harvard's governance boards. And recently they launched an on-campus campaign to elect a slate of candidates to the Board of Overseers on a platform of fossil fuel divestment and ensuring that younger alumni are represented on the university's second highest governing body. And so as both a champion of youth engagement and a member of the Board of Overseers, I wonder how you view work like this and other student activism on this campus.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You know, when I was an undergraduate, I'm not sure I had heard of the Board of Overseers. And I often tell people that I'm on the Board of Overseers and now have the privilege of serving as president, and they say that I always get the same response. That's wonderful. What do they do? And then I explained, because now I've learned, the Board of Overseers, largely, it's an advisory, non-fiduciary role for the institution. And what we do is largely do visitations to schools, like the Kennedy School and others, and to departments to ask Socratic questions about how we can help improve the school, and that's largely its role. In terms of how people get elected to it, the Harvard Alumni Association does, I think, an outstanding job of looking for very diverse candidates all across the alumni hood of this amazing institution and put candidates forward. 350,000 alums vote on it. Having said that, nothing inspires me more than the idealism of young people, and I encourage vigorous debate on all things. When I was in law school, I learned about the theory of civic republican theory, which is not based on a political party, but the idea of Aristotelian sort of deliberative democracy. And I believe in that, and I believe in people, basically raising their hand and say they want to act and disrupt and do things. And as the president of the board and as a board member, none of us would ever endorse or, in terms of the candidacy of anybody, because that's not our role. But I'm proud that the institution has both a very powerful and wonderful sort of system through the HAA, and that we have a petition process. I would also say that it's possible that the HAA could look at some mechanisms in the future just to ensure that there is more recent alums on the board through some kind of process.
Wonderful.
So Kate, let's turn to you as a ROTC cadet. And talk to us about your journey in making that decision, because it's a significant commitment here. You came here anticipating that? What were the threads of that as you look back and making what is a time commitment and physical commitment, emotional commitment, all that goes into your daily life?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually made this decision in high school. I was 17, 18 years old, and I attended the Air Force Academy summer seminar. This is a week long of cadet life, banging on the doors at 5 a.m., telling you to do push-ups, wall sits, saying quotes that you just learned the day before. Very stressful environment. I hated it the first day. But then I started to look at the people around me. And that's when I realized that those were the people I wanted to surround myself with, because these were 17 and 18-year-old kids that were deciding to sign up for something bigger than themselves. And so it really shook me to my core, because I always thought I was going to go to Stanford undergrad, go to Harvard Law School. I had a plan. And then all of a sudden this wrench came into my life, and it was like, no, you're going to join the military. I was like, what? So I decided to apply to the military academies and to ROTC. I ended up here at Air Force ROTC because MIT provides actually the best attachment for Air Force ROTC in the country. And Harvard gets to be a part of that program. So while I'm a Harvard Air Force ROTC cadet, I do all of my training a mile and a half down the road with MIT, Harvard, Tufts, and Wellesley students. And it's been such an incredible experience. While my 5 a.m. morning wake-ups aren't always the most fun, I have received so many lessons of life that I have not been able to really get in the classroom. So whether that be marching around a field for hours at a time, or hearing from panelists like ourselves who actually serve in the military, or even, shooting rifles, it's something that the attention to detail, the ability to focus on others, and the goal of something much bigger than yourself is something that's truly shaped how I perceive the world and how I want to serve in it. So it's been quite the experience, and again, started in high school, but it's a journey I'm very glad to be on.
I mean, for many students here, their service commitment is more episodic. This is a consistent. Walk us through a daily regime that you're in, and how has this affected your undergraduate experience?
Yeah, so every day looks a little different, and we don't have ROTC every day. But my Mondays start at 5 a.m., so I can get to MIT by 6 a.m. for a 3-hour seminar. Check. It is a seminar that evolves throughout your curriculum as an ROTC cadet. So as a freshman, you learn the very basics, and that's actually only an hour class. But it gets up to 3 hours as a junior and senior. But that's, how do you wear your uniform? What does it mean to salute? What does it mean to stand at attention? You learn all the very basic things that are not so basic when you're, again, an 18 or 19-year-old when a lieutenant colonel walks into the room. And then that gradually evolves into much more leadership training and military strategy and understanding current events and geopolitical politics. So that's what we're currently kind of focusing on. And then we also have the military training aspect of it. So that's on Tuesdays. It's 2-hour trainings, and that is completely student-led. And so I think that's something that is really different in ROTC that you don't really receive elsewhere. The juniors and seniors are actually instructing the freshmen and sophomores. And you do all of the logistics, you would do all the room bookings, all of the food, supplies, gatherings, and then in the moment you are instructing. There's no officer telling you what to do. You've created the lesson plan and you're the one actually running the training. So that's an incredible experience as an upperclassman, but also as an underclassman, to look up at people who are just a year or two older than you, who have so much to give. And then there's also the physical training, so lots of push-ups and sit-ups and running. But I think even in that training, you learn so much about self-discipline and making yourself a better self, even if that means stressing your body out a little bit.
We will not have a push-up competition. Eric, don't get nervous.
Yeah. We know who would win,
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sure.
I concede.
Senator Lesser, you have served in a variety of public service roles, from President Obama's historic campaign to working in the White House to now representing Western Massachusetts, where you live, as a state senator. And I would be remiss if I neglected to mention your time here at the IOP. So I wonder,
Or Congresswoman Stefanik, sorry.
But I wonder what you think prepared you for those roles, prepared you emotionally, prepared you to be able to think outside of the box, really pursue your goals in the public service space.
Oh, it's a great question. Well, Maya, first, thank you for the question and for having me. And this is a little bit of a surreal thing to be sitting here next to Elise, because I feel like we spent quite a lot of time here, and she's doing amazing work and is a great friend, and I'm really grateful to be sharing the stage with you today. So
right back at you,
it's good to
Eric.
see you,
I'm
Elise.
so proud of you.
And actually, part of the answer to that question is actually a lot of the people that are in this room. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank actually Ambassador Kennedy, and I see Heather Campion is right there, and Phil Sharp, who was the director when I was an undergrad here, and a lot of people, John Della Volpe, who really supported me and believed in me when I was 18, 19 years old. And I mean, my story is really, what got me involved in politics was really working in my community. So if you get on the Mass Pike right here and you drive 90 miles west, you'll hit Longmeadow, Massachusetts, which is where I live. And it's a New England town right next to a city, Springfield, that was really an industrial center. George Washington put the armory in Springfield, Massachusetts, and ever since then we were really a center of manufacturing. Indian Motorcycles was made there. Westinghouse Electric was based there. American Bosch, Uniroyal tires were all made in Springfield. And then in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, really when I was growing up, those factories closed and thousands of those jobs left. And so our community was really thinking through what our place was going to be in this new economy. And it was right around then, and as the economy was changing, that there were a round of budget cuts, and 40 teachers were threatened with layoff at my school system. Now, 40 maybe doesn't sound like a lot for some people, but in a small town, that's a lot of teachers to lay off in 1 year. And I remember we were called into an assembly, and the school principal explained all these teachers that weren't going to be coming back the next year. And I remember sitting there as a 16-year-old really angry that 14 and 15 and 16 and 17-year-olds were being asked to pay the price for bad decisions that had been made somewhere else. And so we got up and we organized. We went and knocked on doors. People who are familiar with Massachusetts, we have this law, Proposition 2.5. So what that means is you have to go out and literally ask your community to vote to tax itself, to raise property taxes to fund schools. So it doesn't take an IOP class to teach you that that's a tough vote to win. And so we went out there, we knocked on all these doors, and we thought, hey, these cute kids were out there knocking on doors right there. How could they say no? And we got destroyed. The vote failed by a huge margin. But something very important happened, which was a lesson for me, really, I still think about it, which was the pink slips got sent out to the teachers after that vote failed, and it got very real for people. And I sensed once those pink slips went out that the community was kind of reevaluating what the impact of that decision was going to be. So we went right back up and we put the measure right back up on the ballot, except we did some important things. We changed it. We compromised. We did about 2/3 of what we wanted, so we didn't save every job, but the second vote passed. And I remember being 16 years old and sitting or standing in front of the town hall where they were counting the votes. And when the tally was announced, we didn't have Twitter then, so we had to actually be there. And when the votes were counted, literally a lot of the teachers ripped up the pink slips right there. And so I felt very lucky that at a very early age, I learned that despite the sort of messiness and frustrations of the political process, it still remains one of the most important ways to make a difference. And I feel lucky that I came here and got a lot of support, and not everyone gets that kind of support, and got a lot of mentorship. And Ken, who's right in the front row, was part of that as well, and the students, and Elise and I, and a lot of the other students were also able to lean on each other. And that's the final point I would just like to bring up, is when I was thinking about running for office myself, and it's a very scary thing, and I thought I knew what I was doing because I had worked for the president and all this stuff, but it's a scary thing to put your name out there and to run for office. And I called 3 people, I called a lot of people, but 3 people in particular that I do want to point out. I called Elise. I remember exactly where I was when I talked to you, and you were in the middle of your race, I think, when I called, and she took the time to immediately pick up. I called Michelle Wu, who is also a student here and is a city councilor in Boston. I called Pete Buttigieg, not to name drop, but those are the 3. And all 3 were students here. And what I have to say is, a lot of people were telling me not to run, to be perfectly blunt. You know, a lot of people are like, "That's crazy. Why would you do that?" No, well, that's the that's the punchline, at least. So a lot of people were saying, "Don't run," and you know, I had every reason in the world not to run. I was a 3L here. I had an offer at a prestigious law firm. I had a 6-month-old baby, and a lot of people were saying, "Don't run." The 3 people who were completely unambiguous about you have to do it were Pete, Michelle, and Elise. And so you really, it's really going to be your peer group, the people that you're meeting, the students that you're working with, that are going to have your back and are going to support you, and you're going to support each other, you know, all the way down.
Yeah. Oh, I better not lose your guys' numbers. But you've talked a lot about the importance of sharing your personal story when advocating for issues, particularly issues around sustainability and climate change. And students here, including myself, would love to know how really to leverage our Harvard toolboxes in order to kind of refine our personal narratives, while keeping in mind that we enjoy a great level of privilege by being able to be in this room, walk these halls, enter these gates.
Well, Elise can chime in on this, and we've
certainly
talked about this. I mean, I think that the key thing is first acknowledging how privileged we all are, and I think it's very important to always show, not tell. You know, I could go weeks, months, without ever bringing up where I went to school or who I've worked for. It's just not relevant. What's relevant is the work you're doing and the issues you care about. And, let people find out on their own where you went to school or all that stuff. I mean, I feel pretty strongly that if you focus on the work, if you focus on what you want to do, not what you want to be, then you're going to see a lot of success. And I actually got the best advice on that from a mentor of mine, the High Sheriff of Hampden County, Massachusetts, Michael J. Ash, who Heather might know. So Sheriff Ash is a kind of legendary figure, and he sat me down one day, and he's since retired, but he said to me, Lesser, he said, people are going to want to help a young person if they think he's earned it or she's earned it. And that really struck me, which is, I think people are going to be suspicious of a young person that's trying to bite off more than they can chew, right? Or trying to be something without earning it. But if you do the work, and you're going to be equipped to be able to do the work, if you knock on the doors and make the phone calls, I think what you're going to find is that the most powerful and most potent argument in politics right now, and frankly in society right now, is that it's time for a change. And so if you can be that change through what you stand for and what you do, not just what you say, you're going to see a lot of success. And so that would be my advice on what to focus on. And that applies to every issue: environment, criminal justice reform, the economy, electoral reform, you name it. If you just focus on the core of what you're about, what you want to get done, what you want to do, and let the rest take care of itself.
Does anyone want to add? That's a wonderful...
I think, Eric, I think authenticity is also important when you tell stories. Authenticity oftentimes is the buzzword, and who's the more authentic candidate gets discussed a lot by those analyzing different campaigns. But really telling your personal story, I think, resonates with voters in compelling ways. We are very privileged here to have the opportunity to walk these halls and learn from our peers. One of the bad pieces of advice I got when I first ran for office is, don't ever mention the word Harvard, because that's going to turn off voters. And I realized I was proud of the fact that I am the first member of my immediate family to graduate from college. I was proud of the fact that I focused on academics in high school, because I wanted to be a role model for young people, right, to show that if you work hard, really, we live in the greatest country in the world where there's educational opportunities in amazing higher ed institutions, not just Harvard, but all over the country, including in my district and Eric's Senate district as well. But I think telling your personal story is a very powerful way to get people to give you the benefit of the doubt, especially as a young person, whether you're running for office or starting a new organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was incredible. We will now open it up for questions from the audience. Please, please, please ask your questions. But remember, a question does end with a question mark. That's a very important rule here. And if you could introduce yourself when you go up to ask a question, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Hello.
My name's Blake Barclay. I'm a sophomore here at the college studying economics. My question for Elise and Eric especially is, when you were running for office, as a young person, how did you run against people in, I'm sure you were running against people in primaries and generals that probably had a lot more well-established connections and financial resources than y'all did in your initial campaigns. And how did you address that and work on that as you were running?
You want to take it first?
You go first.
Oh. Well, to give people a lay of the land of what I was facing, no rational observer would have advised me to run. I was 28, and I was, as I mentioned, I was a 3L. I was actually a resident tutor in Kirkland House at the time, and I had a 6-month-old and was, kind of on a path that, frankly, is a common path for a lot of your colleagues and will be a common path for a lot of your friends, but I hope is one that you'll challenge, which is to sort of come out of here and go to a bank or a law firm or something like that. But I had always really felt pretty strongly that real change in our country really comes from the community up. And it was President Obama who used to really tell his staff, he would say, and he would say it over and over, both publicly and privately, he'd say, change doesn't come from Washington, change comes to Washington. And I don't think that's a partisan statement. I think that that's just the reality of every social movement, every change we've seen in our country and in our state, even in Massachusetts on a state level, has come from the community up. So I was looking for a way to get back into my community, and you start with the core of what you're about and telling your story, and you work out from there. My very first house party was in my parents' living room, and I think there were 18 people there, 14 of which I was directly related to. So you start with that. You start with that, and then you build out. But what I kind of said to myself was every day I needed to add people and meet new people and add new people to my column. And so you start with that base. You start with whoever it is. Your friends and family is usually how it's going to start, especially if you're young or you're new, and you grow out and you grow out from there. And you have to have some thick skin. You're going to get doors slammed in your face, and you're going to have people who are cynical, and you just have to have enough faith in your message and what you're fighting for. And very importantly, it has to be about your community. You need to do the work of being in touch with your community and your neighbors and what they care about. Because your job is to give voice to your community. It's not just to sort of freewheel whatever you want to do. And so it's a sort of iterative process. You begin by people not paying any attention, and then you try to build a base from there, and you try to get the story out and try to talk to more people and add more people, and then you grow from that. And if I haven't answered this question sufficiently, I do teach a workshop and we'll be doing it in the spring, and we did one last spring that you can take, and we go into this in detail. But the key, I really do think, is knowing why you're running and what you want to do. If you don't have really good answers to those questions, then I would advise even the most talented person to take a breath and wait until you really know what you want to do in terms of do for your community and what you want to deliver for them.
I think that's exactly right. I had a very similar experience. I was 28 years old, same age as you, Eric, when I started thinking about running, and it is actually a challenge to take that first step and look someone and say to them in a serious manner, I'm thinking of running for Congress, would you support me? But you have to take that first step and have those conversations. What I tell every candidate is sit down on your computer, open up an Excel spreadsheet, and write down the first 100 people you're going to reach out to talk to them about your interest in running and ask for their support, but also listen to their perspective. One of the most underestimated important aspects of campaigning is it's not just sharing your views, but it's also listening to voters and really hearing what they're looking for in elected officials. And then you just have to go out there and outwork opponents. I had a very competitive primary. When I first ran, it was one of the most expensive primaries in the country that cycle, and I outworked my opponent and would drive. I have a very rural district, 5 hours to meet with 5 people, and then 5 hours back home. That's an easy day for me back then in my district. But on those tough days, you have to have the fire in your belly, and you have to have the understanding as to why you're running, and it has to be about the community. And then when you run for re-election, it has to be about the results you've been able to deliver to the community, which is why you see some candidates continue to grow when they run for re-election, and some, face challenges when they're not able to point to results that have impacted their community.
Question over here. Hi, my name is Olivia Ferdinand, and I'm the former chair of the Women's Initiative in Leadership, so it's really wonderful to be here with you today, Congresswoman Stefanik. And I wanted to ask you around that topic, specifically what strategies do you use when you're recruiting and persuading women to run for office?
Great question. I'm so glad to see so many strong women leaders at the IOP. I've noticed that actually since I graduated in 2006, but we've had amazing women leaders, and I've had amazing women members of the IOP community that have interned in my office or have interned on my campaign. So very excited about the the WIL program here. What I've noticed is that as Republicans, we've done an effective job of recruiting women to run, but not helping them develop as candidates. So I think the Democrats have a very effective ecosystem, whether it's Emily's List or skills training organizations, to help women get through primaries. There has been a historic trepidation for Republicans to do that because I think there's concern about the historical identity politics. I'm a big believer that we ought to be able to explain why our policies are positively impacting a diverse community, and that means having a positive impact on women. So I've focused on trying to push back on that assumption that we can't talk about recruiting and investing in women early, and why that's so important, but also the candidate development piece and the mentorship and the early fundraising help for women. That's a new strategy on the Republican side. Again, Democrats have been doing this effectively for 30 years, and that's why organizations like Emily's List are so effective at getting candidates through primaries. So the recruitment number is key, but also making sure that they put together top-tier campaigns, and also making sure they have a campaign team around them that allows them to tell their personal story as a non-traditional candidate. Again, you see lots of women candidates talking about their experience as moms, talking about their experience, whether it's as teachers or healthcare providers, just the unique perspective they bring.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, my name's Kate Travis. I'm a sophomore at the college. I know everyone here often talks a lot about the Harvard bubble or feeling a little removed from the community here. So in all of your experiences, how do you recommend balancing serving the community while you're here with taking advantages of the resources that Harvard has to offer to empower you to serve the community once you graduate?
It's a really great question.
Michael, you want to start?
Be happy to. Thank you for that question. As Mark knows well, I was asked to serve on something called the National Advisory Board for Public Service here at Harvard, affiliated with the Phillips Brooks House. And then when Mark gave me a call and said he was going to be asked to have this amazing job, and you're doing a wonderful job at it, absolutely.
Keep going, keep going.
You were born for this. He said, would you be the chair of it, because he was chairing it. So we put together a group of people from across the country that are involved in all kinds of service at many institutions, Cornell with the Cornell tradition, and at Stanford and Tulane and here at Harvard. So it's something I have been thinking about for a while, and we put out a series of ideas for the college. The term that we've been using is public purpose, and we think public service is one aspect of it, but the question is, how do you infuse every aspect of Harvard University, and especially Harvard College, with public purpose? Only 1,600 amazing individuals get the opportunity to join a Harvard class, and yet, of the 40,000 people that apply, you could create many classes of wonderful students over with that, and you get these amazing classmates for life. You get an extraordinary education with transformative experiences, and you get the Harvard brand, which opens doors the rest of your life. So the question that we put forward is, to what end and what is all that about? And we hope that it means that there's an element of leadership and public purpose in it. The main things that I think that are essential is that you do get off the campus, whether it's local, in a community right here in Cambridge or Boston. I took Robert Coles's class years ago, Literature of Social Reflection, and Robert Coles famously said, Roxbury is next door but across an ocean from Harvard. So just actually getting out of the bubble and experiencing in proximity, which Brian Stevenson talks so powerfully about, the idea of that summer of service or public purpose summer that everyone should experience, as President Bacow has talked about, is something that could just be built in, if not as a requirement, then just a common expectation. And then here's an idea too, and then when you come back, then you know where to find all the resources, because they're all here. There's an idea that we've also tossed out that I just want to put out there publicly. So many employers come on campus, and they come really early, freshman, sophomore year, and by junior year, you could end up with an amazing job at 6 figures to say, have a great senior year, come on to us in a year. And yet, so much has been given to everybody here. So here's an idea that we're tossing out. What if employers were asked to sign voluntarily a public purpose compact, which says that if they're going to be recruiting amazing Harvard juniors and seniors, and they offer them a job, it comes also with the ability to do a 1-year fellowship in that company in Harvard's name, anywhere that student wants to take it, for about half the salary. So it could be a Goldman Sachs Harvard fellowship, wherever you want to take it. And the idea is that we need to actually partner with the private sector to say that everybody can have an amazing experience before they go into the private sector, where many folks do want to go, which I understand, and then they can circle back to that, and it can have such an impact, including serving on boards and maybe finding a passion that you want to do in addition to that private sector service. So there's so many ways to do it, but the main point is that there's so many extraordinary things happen here at the IOP and at Phillips Brooks and so many other places. This place is just brimming with public purpose. But at the same time, there's 6,700 undergraduates. And I'm not sure yet we've built the infrastructure and the ethos so that it's touching every single undergraduate in the same way that says essentially at a military academy, which is full of public purpose, which is why you know what you're getting into when you attend, and why I'm so inspired by what Kate is doing and where you're going and you're serving your country. And this can almost be seen as akin to that. You've come to Harvard, now how are you going to serve your country?
Kate, I wonder, because you kind of, when you came here with the expectation of service being part of your 4 years here, if you have any advice along those lines about what it could look like, be it in ROTC or other opportunities, kind of what that mindset could look like for students.
Yeah, so military service is a very different type of service than most folks do here on campus. But in high school, I spent a lot of time, in Key Club and Sir Optimist, and did a lot of like hands-on, face-to-face service with folks that I didn't really do a lot of here. So that's something I have been trying to pursue more of, and I think you've mentioned a lot of great programs through PBHA, Institute of Politics. It's just one of those things where we do have the infrastructure, you just have to tell yourself you have the time. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of Harvard students here will say, I don't have the time to do that, I have to write this paper, or I have to go to this panel, or go to this career fair. But ask yourself this, at the end of the day, is that what is gonna make you happy and fulfilled? I try to do that often. Sometimes the answer is no, and I still do it. But I think finding some sort of program, for me that's military ROTC, but something that you find value out of during your Harvard career, so whether that is PBHA service, IOP service, finding a community service program outside of the Harvard bubble, maybe you do your service over the summer. Find something you're passionate about and put time into that while you're here, because you have the flexibility to do so, not working a 9-to-5 job. And while ROTC is a large commitment, I know there's a lot of other programming that is an hour or two so a week. And a lot of my friends have actually started to kind of join that and reflect on that as we're coming to our senior year. And they've found a lot of great programs, whether it's through women empowerment, like Strong Women, Strong Girls, or being able to actually reach out to the community that we are so ingrained in, yet so far apart from. So ask yourself that question, and maybe you can find a program that will fulfill you.
Wonderful. Looks like we have time for maybe one more question.
Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Bannister. I'm a junior at the college. My question is generally for Michael and Congresswoman Stefanik. Both of you, in your own ways, have founded something that really filled kind of a gap in what you were seeing in the world. Congresswoman Stefanik with EPAC, filling the gap that was recruiting Republican women to run for office, and Michael with City Year, founding something to inspire people to do voluntary service. What is your advice that you would have for people who are interested in doing something different to fill a gap that's like missing? Generally, like, whether it's founding something new or starting something that you really believe in.
You have it.
Okay. My advice is first to find that passion and to take some risks with it. If there's something that you see you want to do, oftentimes entrepreneurs, whether in the private sector or in the nonprofit sector, first join some other organization and they learn what's going on there and they say, this is good, but it makes me think of something a little different. And once you find that passion, as I said earlier, if you can find a partner, it's just so hard to change the world by yourself, and nobody does that really, right? Because when you're up, they're down, and vice versa. And the third thing I advise is become an expert on that area. Learn everything you can about that field, because people say, why is what you're doing different? Isn't that like this, or isn't like that? And then you can differentiate it. And then ultimately, sort of release your passion to the universe. Tell everybody what you're trying to do, because the more that you talk it up, people will actually come out of the woodwork to help, and they'll say, you should talk to so-and-so, and you should talk to so-and-so, especially here. And then at some point, you kind of have to commit. And my own experience was I came out of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and then I clerked for a federal judge, Stephen Breyer, before he was on the court, before he was on the Supreme Court. And because I love law school and I really wanted to do that, but also it was also another brass ring, and you kind of do that. And I was basically working for Stephen Breyer all day and then working with Alan all night, sneaking into what was then the Harvard Computer Center, because they had these Macintoshes, right? And that's 24 hours. And I finally realized I had one foot on a conventional career and one foot on this kind of crazy idea. And everything about me was sort of like doing the conventional thing. It's what your grandmother understands, that like you went to Harvard and you do these jobs, right? And I finally just realized I was listening to The Power of Myth, And reading it by Joseph Campbell, who said, if you follow your bliss will follow you. And you probably have to slay a dragon if you want to find your own happiness. And I think for me, it just might have been just traditional forms of success that everybody understood. And I finally went to Judge Breyer in the middle of my clerkship. And at the time, I did the hardest thing I ever had to do and say, I have to leave here to go do this full time. Wow. I found a friend.
What did he say?
I found a friend who was finishing up a clerkship who ended up becoming a professor of law. He's amazing. He's better at the law than me. And I said, Judge, I've got somebody for you, okay? And it was like, wow. And a couple years later, he asked me to serve on a commission with him on the bicentennial of the Constitution. And he has since come in and sworn in our corps as a Supreme Court justice. And I'll never forget, he says, you have the real jobs, he would say to our corps members, of living democracy. I just interpret it. You make the Constitution come alive. Wow. And it's just, awesome. I am such a fan of Justice Stephen Breyer. And so my point is that, it's by actually committing at some point that the universe opens up for you, but it can be a little bit scary. But if you do all those other things first, you'll probably do it. And if I can take one point of personal privilege for a minute, it's very special for me to be back on campus, and this role that I get to play on the Overseers is just an extraordinary privilege. And to be back at the IOP, where I've had so many of these wonderful experiences sitting in the audience, I've just been electrified throughout my undergraduate career. But my son is here, Nick, and Nick is a sophomore at FOHO. And to be here with my son, who's a sophomore, and he's also social studies, is particularly exciting. And if you talk to him, you also find out that he's organizing Harvard Students for Bernie. So I had to put the plug in for my son here at the IOP and what he's doing politically.
That's great.
Right.
Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
Elise,
that sums it up. I think that advice, I can't beat that advice, but when you talked about this idea of a megaphone, that you'll be amazed at the people that come out of the woodwork. The relationships you develop now, the relationships you develop in your first jobs, your first internships, making sure that those are genuine relationships, those people will come out of the woodwork to support you when you do take that step to find whatever your passion project is. And I've been so blessed to have those relationships and friendships here. And I want to ask Eric to tell that story when the White House transition, because I think this really signifies the importance of relationships and across the aisle relationships. You're better at telling this story than me.
Well, all right, so we'll wrap up. So Elise, on a long list of accomplishments, also worked in the Bush White House, and your official title, you worked for Josh Bolton, right? As his assistant.
Joel Kaplan, but
Joel Kaplan, yeah. So it was a pretty equivalent role to what I was going to be doing for David Axelrod. And so I actually remember we have a history of making monumental phone calls to each other. But several years before I called her for advice on running for office, shortly after President Obama won his election, I was in Chicago. And David Axelrod, who many of you know and is on the board of the IOP here, called me and offered me this position to come be his assistant at the White House. And I asked him, I said, that's great. I said, what do I have to do? What's the job description? And he basically said, well, anything I say. No. And then he said, I don't know, go figure it out. So I called Elise, because Elise at the time was working at the White House and was packing up and getting ready to leave, literally packing up. And and quite frankly, that was a hard period, and Elise would have been, well within her right to kind of say, talk to you later, or I don't want to talk right now about this, because it was obviously a transition of power. And I remember actually Elise walked me through what her responsibilities were. She walked me through how a White House works, and all the different things, how you connect the phone calls. And I actually remember, I have a really vivid memory that you invited me into the West Wing before the official transition. And I came in and I did a West Wing tour, and the Bush administration folks were all still there. And I have to say, completely polite and helpful. A really incredible moment, just how classy, quite frankly, you were, Elise, and the Bush administration's entire team was at every level, assisting all of us. And it made the whole thing a lot smoother, and it made me better at my job. So I personally am very grateful to you. But it was because we had a relationship and knew each other from when we were in college, and our friendship was not about. We obviously have political disagreements, but our friendship was not about the policy disagreements. We had trust in each other and in each other's common motives for the country, and that really made all the difference.
And just remember, when you go to someone else, it's great when they help you, but always remember to say yes when someone comes to you for help, because that is important as well.
That's right.
Wonderful.
Well, what a fun night. This was fantastic. This was awesome. Thank you.
I love that story.
There's so many great things about the IOP, but all of your narrations through public office and public purpose and your own service, Kate, is really just exemplary. You've led and are leading lives of consequence, and for those of us that get the privilege of being here at the IOP, there could not be a better representation. Thank you, Maya, for expert moderating.
Good job, Maya.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining us. What a great evening.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Martha's going to take our picture.